All right, it's that time of the week. We're talking with financial expert Chuck Zodda from the Armstrong Advisory Group. And Chuck, thanks so much for being with us again.
Absolutely. Great to join you.
All right, so let's start off with this. The U.S. economy, it shrank by 0.3% in the first quarter under the Trump administration. How much of this is fueled by the Trump tariffs?
Well, I think generally it's a little bit difficult to try to untangle, exactly what is cause and effect. Here you do have a couple things just because of how GDP is constructed. Anytime that you are seeing a rise in imports, which we did see as companies and individuals tried to front run these tariffs, it does result in some GDP drag simply because imports are subtracted in the GDP calculation. The counterpoint to that is you had some other things that showed up, as additional growth. You had a situation where businesses were investing in equipment, and so that shows up as more growth. Inventories were building, that showed up as additional growth. So I think that overall, the way I would characterize this quarter is one that certainly was slow, but I don't know how much read through there is to subsequent quarters just because things are going to get a little bit choppy and a little bit messy as far as, how things are moving from a cause and effect perspective over the next few months. But certainly in this one, you can see some of the impacts of policy, but it's unclear how they are going to end up progressing into the next couple quarters.
Is there a chance that the outlook can look a little bit better if some of these tariffs are lowered, including like those imposed on China?
It certainly is. And I think that the thing that I come back to on this is that ultimately tariffs are a tax on business. And it's going to result in one of two things, either businesses eating those costs and their margins coming down, or businesses passing those costs through and consumers having to pay more. Usually it's a combination of both to some degree. So I think that certainly when we look at this, if you were to see a little bit of a relief here and there on some of these tariffs with maybe individual deals within specific countries, or as you noted, if the rate on Chinese imports were to come down from the current 145%, that could result in a little bit of a smoother path here. But I'm not sure that we are necessarily going to see enough there to make a huge shift in the near future. But, we'll have to see how this evolves. It obviously can change on a dime. And so you have to really, see how things go over the next couple of months, because I think that's the time frame in which you'd likely get the biggest impact from a shift in policy towards any one country.
Overall, how would you describe these first 100 days of the Trump administration and how it has impacted the U.S. economy? And then on top of that, the financial markets?
Well, I think the big thing is from each of the Federal Reserve branches, we get different surveys of the businesses in their various areas. And I think that some of the responses that we've been getting there have been informative in that, look, it's just been something where there's a lot of uncertainty about what the policy is going to look like, be it on trade, taxes, a number of different areas. And so it's causing businesses and households to potentially pull back on plans that they might have had for later on this year. So I'm not sure that there's been a huge impact in the first quarter, actually, just because again, a lot of the plans that were made for businesses and households in that first quarter, they made those decisions back in last September or last August as to what they wanted to do in January or February. I think what's more interesting to me is, hey, does the uncertainty that we're seeing prevent businesses from investing in the second half of this year? Does it prevent people from making large purchases later this year? Those are things that we're just not going to know until we have more time. But those are the questions that I think are out there at the moment.
The dollar has weakened significantly, globally during the Trump administration, at least so far through this presidency. Is there a way that that could actually help the U.S. economy?
Well, there is. And I think the big thing is if you look back to President Trump's first term back in 2017, the value of the dollar dropped by about 10% during that year. And you can make a case that, hey, if you have a gradual decline in a currency, it enhances the ability for that country to export goods just because they become cheaper overseas. I think in this case, you've had about a 5% decline in the value of the dollar in, effectively about a month or so. And so that kind of volatility in a currency can make it a little bit more challenging to do business if it were to continue. Now, we've seen some stability there in the last week or two. So maybe we're starting to find, a little bit more of a narrower range that we're going to be seeing there. But there is a case to be made that, look, if you do see a gradual decline in a currency, it can help with exports. And that can be one thing that potentially helps an economy. And certainly it meshes with what the Trump administration is saying they want to do from a trade perspective.
Now, we've been up and down, stock market wise with some of the jitters being based on some of these Trump tariffs. What do you forecast here for the second quarter of the year now under the Trump administration?
So I'll be 100% honest. I don't know exactly what direction this is going to go in next, just because, quite honestly, no one does. But I do think that continued volatility is something that we may very well see, simply because as we start to get economic data, there's a chance that some of that starts to show a little bit more weakness. But you also could have the Trump administration announcing deals with countries on a one-off basis as it relates to trade, and those could provide a little bit of a boost in the opposite direction to markets. So I don't know where markets end up, 3 months later as we're sitting here on July 4th. But I do think some continued volatility is likely in the cards, just because I think it's probably going to be a battle between some weakening economic data that may start to show up, but also some easing of some of these trade tensions. And it's going to be just, the magnitude of both of those moves that determines where we are in a few months here.
All right, so we'll see how it all plays out. And the good news is, Chuck, we get a chance to chat with you every week, so we can talk more about it next week as well. Thank you so much for the time, Chuck Zodda from the Armstrong Advisory Group. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you.